This has been so ridiculously subsidized. What is it? Something like $1 billion in subsidy every single year. They've gone through $45 billion of taxpayer money since its inception in like 1970, 71. And all of this time, they couldn't perhaps have thought of ways to improve, safeguards for when trains go to high speeds, which not really is high speed, but to at least go above 58, 60 miles per hour. This is insane.
Well, I think the important thing to keep in mind is that the average American travels about 15,000 miles a year in a car and about 20 miles on an Amtrak. It's a tiny fraction of the population that is actually using this system, and the idea that we're going to ask taxpayers to pour more money into fixing what, I think you said it right, is a 19th century transportation system, which probably will not exist by the end of the 21st century. There is technology that could have prevented this crash called positive train control,
right.
that would have basically triggered something that would have stopped the train, so this human error of speeding through this particular area of the track couldn't have happened. And Congress mandated that Amtrak put positive train control throughout its system back in 2008, and it was supposed to be throughout the system by 2015. Well, that didn't happen, and the reason is technological progress doesn't happen through congressional mandates.
Right.
It happens through innovation and competition.
$45 billion in subsidies over the past few decades, which I'm trying to figure out how more money would make the train go slower in a 50-mile-per-hour zone there, Jim.
That's just federal subsidies as well. What's been happening,
wow.
The latest trend is that states increasingly are pouring money into Amtrak's and pouring money into these long-haul lines that are really basically fun for tourists. It's the equivalent of subsidizing Disneyland. It really makes no sense.
And from what I've read, the travel on Amtrak only accounts for 0.1% of all America's passenger travel, and yet it receives more subsidies, state and federal, as you were saying, than anything else.
About 30 times per passenger mile, and that's again just the federal.
Wow.
That doesn't take into account states. And we're in an age where we're coming upon the rise of the autonomous vehicle, driverless cars. I think it's hard to know how these things will play out. I think there's very good reason to believe that share will fall, and that in 20, 30 years there really won't be a need for these, a technology where a large vehicle runs on a fixed rail system at all.
Right.
So,
yeah, in order to make this successful, basically you would need to, they just need to give it entirely to a private entity, completely deregulate it, because giving it away to a private entity, I think it would serve all of us better than continually being a drain on our resources. But even more than that, from the way I understand it, when you look, and Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, she brings up China. Well, it's easy to bring up China because you have all of these highly populated cities that are pretty clustered together, whereas in the United States, our geography is a little bit different. We don't have as many high populated cities. Maybe the Northeast corridor is where it would make the most sense. But you're talking about, in order to be able to facilitate what they dream of, from what I understand, you would have to basically rip up the interstates, because the interstates are on that passable land that would best facilitate high-speed train travel. Then you get into eminent domain. Then there's like a million issues that go along with this.
You're absolutely right, and it's the same in Europe. You have these dense cities, so rail makes more sense. It just doesn't make sense. Pretty much the Northeast corridor between Washington, D.C., Boston, and New York is pretty much the only place in the country where it does make sense. They're actually, contrary to what you'll read in many media reports, the Northeast corridor actually is a big money loser. It's not highly profitable. But you're right, rail does not make sense in the U.S. At one point, there was talk of building a high-speed rail line between Cleveland and Columbus, Ohio. I've driven that route. There would be 3 people on that train. It just makes no sense.
And it makes no sense, especially when you consider the boondoggle in California. They want a high-speed rail. Going to, from LA to San Francisco, except that there's really not enough of the population, from what I understand, that would necessarily use it to make it cost effective. And they're spending all their money on this while they're going through a drought, and they don't have enough water treatment plants to be able, desalinization plants that would be able to they're next to an ocean. I think that would be like a more pressing matter than this vanity project of high-speed rail.